Mislim, samo jednom si pa došla igra.
Nema ja to jer plaćano kako kupcije, ne znam.
Nismo, tako smo ovako. 16.3. smo nasli pun i on je do sada taj rezervar. A u januaru februaru sigurno ima još se baviti.
Jer smo bili punili u januaru februaru.
Pa jesmo sigurno.
Znači. Evo ne mogu naći banka. Što da bude 26, to je bilo sve u 12. mjesecu.
Onda smo u 12. do...
Ići da 12. na sutra. Bilo je, znači, koliko godina znači, pređu kilometra u 20. godini, aj Bog, znači imalo 56.000 prvog 25. 56.000, a ovaj znači trošna količina goriva. To je 5 kilometara, 4.800, znači ovako to bilo. Ovako ćemo staviti. Znači prvog 20 imao 56.000, 642, plus šta je prešao u čitavu 20. godinu, 4.850, jednako. Znači, stanje prvog 21. je bilo 61.492. Ukoliko vozno kasko osigurano. Kad biješ nije osigurano.
Ovo sipanje je bilo 61.888 km.
Samo, koliko vozno kad pređemo kilometara? Jesmo li mi imali blagaj, ajde vidimo da mi prošli blagaj. Rezidencija, parking misija, crnopta, sada, limit, zdravstvena strana, plata. U januaru 2000. Ovdje. Ne. Januaru, ja ću još jednom povedati. Neđe i vi, kako se zove to, vodite sebi Imate li vi evidenciju je to ikad izašlo? Rezidencija. UBS to je kredit, internet rezidencija, parking misija, refundacija, auto osiguranje, 1842. 1842. Koliko je bilo odlično izmenizacija? Ništa. Lice zaduženo za vozilo. Namjerno za potrebu šefa velika koja. Drugo da dobili servisa, u tom nismo na voditelja ništa. Glavni ukupni trošak servisa, ništa. Broj zamjenjenih ljubav, ništa. Pređeno kilometara u
61.880.
Samo ovdje. 61.880 minus 61.492 je 388.
Da,
Za prva. Za 3 mjeseca, pa šta ćemo da 388, pa što ćemo punt više od jednog? Ja pređem sa jednim rezervom 1200 km. Treba ima pol rezerva.
Ima više od toga. Ima još ovdje, mislim, to koliko je tu. Sad je na broju 62.000.
Hello, Mrs. Higgy. Could you hear us? Yeah. Could you try to turn on your camera?
Yes, I don't know why my camera is not on. Let me see. Wait. There we are. Can you see me?
Yep. Why? Remove those. Okay, could you also try to speak again, please, Mrs. Higgy?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you and we can see you well. Ouais, si tu peux muter, Monsieur Babich. Super. Okay, so everything is fine for us, Mrs. Higgy.
Excellent. So shall I just unmute myself half hour?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Our test was successful. Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See you.
It's a minute after 12 on my watch, so we can start the meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from Geneva. To introduce myself, I am Dumisani Dladla, the head of the ATT Secretariat and the secretary for this meeting. We are on day number 5 of the ATT meetings planned for this day. It's the last day of the week. Before I can introduce the president to formally start with the proceedings of today, I would like to remind this meeting about the rules that will be applicable during the course of the meetings today. Firstly, since we're on virtual meeting, we would request all delegates to ensure that their cameras as well as their microphones are switched off for the duration of the meeting. We have published a speakers list on the basis of your request that you made last night, and that is available on the website. Would appreciate if our delegates can check the speakers list so that they are aware when next they are about to speak. When the discussion time comes, we will call speakers in a set of 3 so that they can be aware if they're about to be given an opportunity to speak. If you are invited to take the floor, we will therefore request the speaker to turn on their microphone as well as their camera so that we can see and hear them. If you have not inscribed on the speakers list, but you would want to take the floor at any given time of the meeting, you can request for the floor via the chat function. And once the published list of speakers has been exhausted, we'll proceed to those who have requested the floor through the chat function. We are making an appeal to delegates to use the chat function specifically for requesting for the floor and not use it as a medium of communicating with about everyone who has joined this meeting. If a delegate has got a question about that which is being stated or said by a presenter or any other delegate, I think we'll ask if you've got something to say about that to actually ask for the floor so that we can be heard by everyone. And finally, these meetings have 6 languages available. And if you go to your screen at the bottom of it, you can see that there is an interpretation button, which you can use for purposes of choosing the language that you'd want to use. These are the rules for today, and the list is exhausted. But I want to take this opportunity at this point to invite the president of the 7th Conference of States Parties, Ambassador Lansana Jibri of Sierra Leone, to commence with the proceedings of today. Mr. President, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, and I really appreciate the efficiency and competence with which you have handled this proceeding so thus far. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, if I may call this meeting to order. It is my singular honor and privilege to welcome you all to the CSP7 informal preparatory meeting. This meeting forms part of the preparation process for the 7th Conference of States Parties to the Arms Trade Treaty planned for the period 30th August to 3rd of September 2020. At the very beginning, I would like to welcome all representatives of ATT states parties, signatory states, other states, civil society, and industry to this meeting. I appreciate the effort you've all made to participate in this virtual meeting, despite the challenges of the ongoing pandemic and other related issues. I'd also like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the vice presidents, to the management committee, to the chairs and facilitators of working groups, to the chair of the VTF selection committee, and to the ATT secretariat, in particular for working together in making this meeting possible. Distinguished delegates, you may recall that the sixth conference of states parties conducted in written procedure established an informal preparatory process for CSP7 as a platform for an inclusive consultation. To streamline this process, the president and the ATT office holders decided on the schedule of ATT meetings for the period leading up to CSP7. Due to constraints presented by the ongoing pandemic, the confirmed schedule was communicated to the ATT community in February through the ATT Secretariat channel of communication. In the context of prevailing circumstances, we plan and announce one set of working groups meetings, an informal preparatory meeting to be held virtually over the period 26th to 30th April 2021, which is today. In addition, we have created a possibility for a remote consultation to be held intersectionally in May to June of this year to finalize documentation arising out of these April meetings that will be submitted to CSP7 for consideration. As you may be well aware, the purpose of preparatory meetings is to create a transparent platform to consult with all states parties and other stakeholders in the run-up to CSP7. We believe that an effective consultation process on CSP7 preparations will help bring about some degree of certainty to the expected outcomes of the forthcoming conference. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, all documents for meetings this week were circulated by the Secretariat to all ATT stakeholders and posted on the ATT website in all treaty languages, i.e. Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. To further improve the level of participation in these meetings, it gives me great pleasure to note that all the working groups meetings this week have enjoyed document translations and in-session interpretation. A similar arrangement has been made for this very meeting. Distinguished delegates, the President and the rest of the ATT office holders observe with satisfaction the consolidation of the ATT process with its institutional infrastructure in place. The ATT subsidiary bodies functioning well, and discussions on substantive treaty implementation gathering momentum. We encourage the ATT community to continue on this path. Before I turn my attention to the agenda for this meeting, I would like to inform this meeting that the CSP7 presidency has undertaken a number of activities in the area of treaty universalization since coming into office in August 2020. I will brief this meeting about the universalization efforts of the CSP7 presidency during agenda item number 3D of this meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me now turn my attention to the draft agenda for today. This agenda that was circulated as part of documentation for this meeting. Agenda item number 2 looks at the overview of implementation of CSP6 decisions. During this agenda item, I'll invite the head of the ATT Secretariat to give us an overview of the status of implementation of the decisions taken by CSP6. After that, we'll go to agenda item number 3. During that item, we will receive reports from all the ATT's established subsidiary bodies in terms of how these bodies are progressing with the execution of tasks assigned to them. We will start with the voluntary trust fund, followed by the working groups and conclude with the management committee. I'd like to point out that under the management committee sub-item, we will receive 2 reports, and these will be 1, overview presentation by the ATT Secretariat on the status of ATT finances, including the sponsorship program. And number 2, introduction of the revised paper on the draft elements for guidelines for making financial arrangements under Rule 81D of the ATT's financial rules. Then we will go to item number 4, agenda item number 4, which will focus on the proposed draft agenda items for CSP7. After exhausting the agenda items planned for today, the meeting will conclude, I'm sure to the relief of many. Distinguished delegates, with this explanation, may I take it that the draft agenda for this meeting is adopted? Will any delegation like to take the floor at this time? This does not seem to be the case. Distinguished delegates, I will now turn to my attention to item number 2 of the agenda. At this stage, I would like to invite the head of the ATT Secretariat, Mr. Dumisani Dabla, to give us an overview of the CSP6 decisions. Mr. Secretary, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. As directed by the President, I will proceed and provide an overview of the status of implementation of the CSP6 decisions that were taken last year. Delegates will be reminded that last year, a decision was taken as a result of the current pandemic to have CSP6 conducted in written procedure and decisions taken via silence procedure. And what I will do then during the course of this brief presentation is to reflect on the decisions that were taken at the time and how these have been implemented in the intervening period. During CSP6, the various subsidiary bodies of the ATT prepared documentation. And these documentations were submitted by the President to states parties for decisions via the silence procedure. 17 decisions were submitted, to be specific, for consideration by state parties. However, 14 of those decisions were adopted by states parties and 6 of those were not adopted. The 14 decisions that were adopted are currently under implementation by the various entities under the ATT. I would, during the course of this presentation, give you a reflection of where we stand with regard to implementation of those decisions. However, CSP6 decided that if those 6 decisions are not adopted, they were to be taken forward during the CSP7 cycle. And I will, again, in a moment, explain to you what has happened to ensure that that directive of the CSP6 has been taken forward to ensure that decisions or draft decisions not adopted last year are indeed taken forward. As it has become customary, the Conference of State Parties normally elect or appoint office holders. In that regard, and in accordance with the provisions of the ATT rules of procedure, rule number 9 to be specific, Conference elected the CSP7 president in the person of Ambassador Jiberi of Sierra Leone, who's sitting next to me. And secondly, the Conference elected 4 vice presidents, and again in accordance with rule number 9 of the rules of procedure. And thirdly, in accordance with the VTF terms of reference, the Conference appointed 15 members or states parties to be members of the VTF selection committee. Progress thus far is that all these office holders are in office and they are hard at work. In the area of finances, the Conference adopted the CSP7 budget, or the budget for the financial year 2020-2021, comprising of 2 elements. Element 1 is the budget of the Conference of States Parties, CSP7 to be specific. And the second element is the budget of the ATT Secretariat. The budget as adopted is currently under implementation by the ATT Secretariat and in the context of the applicable ATT financial rules. Whilst we're implementing the budget, we are guided by certain principles. And those are principles of efficiency, as well as the principles of financial discipline or fiscal discipline. We are also taking advantage of the flexibility of the ATT financial rules to ensure that we close the accounts of the ATT as determined by or as allowed by the financial rules and at the same time as determined by CSP5 conference. In the area of the working groups, a specific decision was taken by conference to endorse the standing agenda items as well as tasks for the working group on transparency and reporting. As you might have seen during the course of the week during their session, that decision or those standing items were actually central to the program of work that was rolled out by this working group during their session, I think on Wednesday or Tuesday and Wednesday to be specific. The CSP6 conference also established a new subsidiary body, which is called the Diversion Information Exchange Forum, to operate under its terms of reference as adopted by states parties. At the same time, conference decided or mandated the CSP7 president to organize the first formal meeting of the forum. The progress with regard to the implementation of this decision is as follows. Firstly, the president of conference had appointed the chair of the forum or of this Diversion Information Exchange Forum. And that is Mr. Tom Nish of Belgium. With regard to the first meeting of this forum, there is a possibility that exists that the first formal meeting of this forum will take place during CSP7. But that is dependent on two variables. One, it's dependent on the evolution of the current pandemic. And two, it's dependent on the format of CSP7. And I say so because we have had the chair of the forum, Mr. Tom Nish, signaling a preference that it would be preferable for the first meeting to be held in person. So if CSP7's format is not an in-person meeting, I guess it would be very difficult for this first formal meeting of this forum to take place. And of course, that will be determined as we get closer to the date. At this point in time, we are highlighting the possibility of the meeting taking place during CSP7. In the area of the management committee had submitted a report to CSP6 regarding the conclusion that they have made with regard to the secretariat having to continue with the administration of the sponsorship program, since it was entrusted to the secretariat in the year 2018 in the conference held in Tokyo, CSP4 to be specific. The secretariat is hard at work in ensuring that the functions related to the administration of the sponsorship program are actually implemented in earnest. However, we do highlight that as a result of the current pandemic and the cancellation of a number of meetings, the sponsorship program had not been able to function well, simply because it is meant to support the participation of delegates at meetings. So if the meetings are cancelled, and I think therefore I would reflect to you the status of the finances of this program so that you can understand where we stand and the impact that the pandemic has had on the operations of the sponsorship program. In the spirit of continuity or business continuity, CSP7 decided or established an informal preparatory meeting, a process of informal preparatory meetings, as well as the working group meetings. However, the dates of these meetings were to be determined by the president. And the president then, after consultation with other office holders, had made a determination and announced the dates of these meetings. And that is why we are meeting here today, because of that determination. So the date of 26th to the 30th of April 2021 was identified as a date by which we can have a meeting in a virtual format. However, in the determination, another aspect that I need to highlight is that there was also an indication that there will be a remote consultation conducted between May and June to actually be able to process the documents that will be arising out of these meetings. And again, conference decided that on the dates as well as venue of CSP7, and you'll be aware that conference of state party number 7 will be taking place between these dates, the 30th of August 2021 to the 3rd of September 2021. I emphasize that we made an error on the screen, we say 2020, we have gone beyond that. And these meetings will be held in Geneva, Switzerland, on the assumption that it will be an in-person meeting. But the determination of the format of the meeting will be a function, it will be something that will be done as we get closer to the date. At this point, we are hopeful that the meeting will be in person. However, depending on circumstances, it may take a different format, but that will be confirmed as appropriate. And finally, Mr. President, I just want to spend a brief moment on the draft decisions that were not adopted by CSP6, so that I can demonstrate what progress has been made with regard to implementing them. As I had said, conference decided, CSP6, that those draft decisions that are adopted were to be taken forward during the CSP7 cycle. The president of conference currently initiated a process of consultation which was very inclusive, in a way of trying to engage and try to assess the options that were going to be considered for taking forward or for resolving the draft decisions of CSP6 which are not approved. The consultation process therefore indicated two options available and feasible options. One option was with regard to draft decision 17, which was a working paper, a draft working paper by CSP6 president, which was not adopted. That in order to move that draft decision forward, what was to happen was that Argentina was going to conduct some consultations with a view of achieving consensus on certain aspects of the paper which were of concern to certain delegations. And as a result of that, there was to be a revised working paper. And during the course of this week, Ambassador Villegas of Argentina had presented the revised working paper in the spirit of, in line with this determination that was made. But option number 2, that came out of consultations that the president had consulted with regard to taking some of this decision forward, was with respect to draft decision 9 to 11 relating to the working group on effective treaty implementation, multi-year work plans, as well as the management committee mandate, as well as the application of Rule 81D. The option that was felt to be a most feasible one was that the president was going to prepare proposals to states parties via silence procedure. And those proposals were going to request certain decisions from states parties. With respect to working multi-year work plans for Wigeti, the proposal was that those documents were to be welcomed by state parties in their revised format. And of course, the silence procedure was initiated and states parties had agreed therefore to welcome the revised work plans relating to the Wigeti. And at the same time, there was a proposal made to state parties to extend the mandate of the management committee so that they can be able to revise the draft guidelines that were not approved by CSP6. with a view of getting them approved during CSP7. And during the silence procedure, states parties agreed to extend the mandate of the MC. And the MC will, during the course of this meeting, give an update of where they stand with regard to the revision of the draft guidelines. And finally, and alongside the extension of the mandate of the management committee was the application of Rule 181D as it relates to application by states parties or by states under the VTF as well as the sponsorship program. And the decision of states parties was that whilst the management committee is working on the draft guidelines for CSP7's consideration and decision, whilst that is the case, no state shall be prejudiced of the application of Rule 81D from applying from the VTF as well as sponsorship program until CSP7. So those were the decisions that were taken by states parties in a bid to move forward the draft decisions of CSP7 or CSP6 that were not adopted. Mr. President, this is the summary or the overview of what has happened with draft decisions of CSP6 and how they've been implemented thus far. So I wish then to hand over to you and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for the comprehensive and overview presented. I now open the floor for delegations to give their view on the status of implementation of the CSP6 decisions. Excellencies, delegates, the floor is now open. The way to speak, do we have a speakers list? There seems to have been no delegation has pre-signed up to respond, to speak on this one. Right. I mean, is that the case, Mr. Secretary?
I confirm, Mr. President, there's been no request for the floor under this item. And as well, we have been monitoring the chat function and I'm advised that no one is requesting to speak under this item. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And that concludes agenda item number 2. I'd like to thank the head of the ATT Secretariat for this overview. Distinguished delegates, we now move on to agenda item number 3, progress reports of ATT subsidiary bodies. I will now invite the ATT subsidiary bodies to give us their progress reports on assigned responsibilities. I will start with the Voluntary Trust Fund. The chair of the Voluntary Trust Fund Selection Committee and the ATT Secretariat will give us a report on the status of the operation of the VTF, including an update on VTF-funded projects and applications received thus far to the 2021 VTF project cycle. Let me now invite the chair of the VTF Selection Committee and the head of the ATT Secretariat to give us the VTF's report. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. At the outset, I would like to express New Zealand's sincere thanks to you, Mr. President, for so skillfully steering the work of our treaty and onwards towards CSP7. I would also like to thank the ATT Secretariat and the 14 other members of the Voluntary Trust Fund Selection Committee for their dedication and support for the work of the fund. In particular, New Zealand acknowledges the hard work of the German delegation in chairing the VTF for its first 3 years of life. As many of you are no doubt aware, the VTF is a flexible, multi-donor instrument set up and operating to assist states parties with implementing their national obligations under the treaty. it was established by the Second Conference of States Parties in 2016, pursuant to Article 16 of the treaty. At the fourth meeting of States Parties in Tokyo, it was decided that I would assume the chairmanship of the VTF Selection Committee following the fifth meeting of States Parties, and last year, New Zealand's term was extended beyond that initial one-year term. We are very grateful for the confidence expressed in us. Mr. President, a couple of specific comments on some aspects of the VTF. First, as to funding. Since its first call for contributions in November 2016, the fund has received more than $9 million in voluntary contributions from 28 states, representing a wide range of regional groups. May I take this opportunity to sincerely thank all donors for their contributions and encourage all states parties in a position to do so to make further financial contributions to the fund. Although the financial situation of the VTF is sound at present, we must not rest on our laurels and take this for granted for the future. The continuity and diversity of financial contributions is, of course, critical to both the sustainability and the credibility of the task the VTF has been set of advancing implementation of our treaty. It is for this reason that the New Zealand government has decided this year to contribute a further New Zealand $100,000 to the fund, tagged specifically for projects in our Pacific region. May I give now a brief update on last year's cycle. The COVID-19 pandemic affected all of our lives and indeed our work last year, and the 2020 VTF cycle was no exception. Because last year's proposals had been submitted before the pandemic took hold, we later reached out to each applicant to ensure that they wished to proceed with their project and to confirm that they were able to meet requisite health and safety requirements with regard to the conditions of the pandemic. I am delighted to report that 9 projects approved last year are progressing well, with almost all of the projects now having commenced. A word on outreach. The pandemic also impacted the New Zealand delegation's ability to hold some of the in-person outreach activities we had planned over the last 12 months, including the VTF side event during First Committee, which we had held in 2019 in New York, but of course weren't able to last year. The practical workshop on the VTF application process for potential applications, which we had held in Geneva in January 2020, that too has had to be in abeyance. However, we adapted our approach and produced a series of 3 short instructional videos to assist potential applicants in preparing their application for VTF funding. The videos provide an introduction to the VTF. They give top tips for filling out the application form and tips for completing the budget form. They are available on the VTF website, and we would encourage all states and particularly prospective VTF applicants to view them. We've also made some tweaks to the VTF application forms to make them more user-friendly. On now for a brief update on the current VTF cycle. The call for project proposals under the current cycle was issued on 2 December last year, and the application period was open from then until 12 February this year. I am pleased to report that we have received a total of 21 applications for support from the fund during this year's cycle from 20 states. This makes it clear that there remains strong interest in the fund and in ensuring the ATT's implementation. I will be convening a virtual meeting of the Selection Committee next month on 27 May, at which the Selection Committee will conduct a full assessment of the applications. Applicants will then be advised of the committee's decisions by 11 June. However, at that point, there may still be some projects that the committee would like to approve, but for which we require some further information, clarification, or refinement in order to give them the green light. We will certainly endeavour to ensure that any applications that are not approved by the committee do receive sufficient feedback to allow them to be revised and resubmitted in a future VTF cycle, if that is the applicant's wish. We also hope that prospective applicants hold on to any project ideas that aren't feasible at present due to COVID-19, with a view to submitting them in the future. I'm confident that the committee would welcome that. In closing, please allow me to once again extend my sincere thanks to all VTF donors, applicants, to my colleagues on the selection committee, and of course to the Secretariat for the commitment you all have to the fund, and by extension to the full and effective implementation of our treaty. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Higgins of New Zealand. Thank you, and thank you for the additional commitment that New Zealand has made with this financial commitment with respect to the VTF fund. I now turn to the head of the Secretariat to make a submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would as directed make further information available on the VTF status, in addition to that which has already been provided by the chair of the selection committee of the Voluntary Trust Fund. As you will be aware, the Secretariat has got a responsibility under the VTF, and it arises out of the terms of reference of the VTF. And on the basis of that, the Secretariat is administrator of the fund. Accordingly, it performs all the functions that are administrative in nature regarding the functioning of the Voluntary Trust Fund. This presentation will cover about three aspects. One will be the status of our contributions, so that which has been already indicated will give you the breakdown of where we stand in terms of financial contributions. And secondly, we'll give you a reflection of the progress that we are making with the implementation of the projects that have been funded by the VTF. And thirdly, we would conclude by just giving a reflection on the breakdown of the application profile of the 2021 cycle. So the VTF, as you are aware, since it was established in 2016, we have received funding from 28 donors, to which we are very grateful. And I'll take a moment to read their names out, because they are very important, and I will take a moment just to read these names out. And whilst I read their names, I would leave the flags on the screen, and I'm reading from left to right. I started to read. These are the donors to the VTF. It's Argentina, Australia, Austria, Bulgaria, Canada, Costa Rica, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Japan, Mexico, Montenegro. And you come to the next slide. Then we have Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Republic of Korea, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, the UK, and the government of Flanders, Belgium. So these, Mr. President, are the donors to the VTF fund. And we're very, very grateful for their contributions. The status of funding, as I had indicated, this is a breakdown of how much each state has made a contribution. I'm not going to read the figures, but this presentation will be available for you to read at your own convenience. It will be on the website starting on Monday. But this is a breakdown of the contributions by each of the states that I've read out. But the total contribution that we have received then towards the projects is $9.8 million. It's a lot of money, and we are grateful for having raised this amount of money over such a short period of time. Well, in addition to the money for the projects, we have also received additional funding from 2 states specifically, who have put money aside to the VTF to support the outreach program of the VTF, which is the promotion of the VTF, marketing of the VTF, to ensure that we are able to attract as much applicants as possible, but at the same time, attract as much contributors or donors as possible. And if you take the money for the projects together with the money for the VTF outreach program, it takes the total contribution to the VTF to $9.9 million. On receipt of this money, on determination by the VTF selection committee, we have deployed this funding. As said, we have received 9.8 million for the projects, and we have used this money to fund quite a number of projects. Up to this point, we have used about 5.2 million US dollars to fund 52 projects across almost all regions of the world. We are happy about the footprint of the VTF. It's got a reach that is indeed international. We spent money on 2017 projects, 2018 projects, and also 2019 and 20, as well as money on the administration, because it's part of the arrangements that we have in place that there should be administration that is supported out of the VTF contributions. And we are indicating here the extent to which that has cost us on the basis of decisions that were made with regard to that. Moving forward, we have money that is uncommitted for future projects. And we have in the kitty $4.6 million US. We are happy about this. The chair had indicated that yes, we've got money, but we are not complacent with this, because we would need to have additional money to continue to run this operation. But for now, we are in a good financial position to be able to advance the objectives of the VTF in the medium term. With regard to the status of projects, again, I will not be getting down to detail here. Safe to say that for the first year of the VTF, which was 2017, we funded, or basically there are 15 projects that we funded for implementation, and all of them have been completed and they've implemented, and this cycle has been closed. We are very certain that this cycle has been closed, and we are happy that 15 projects were successfully implemented. Secondly, in the 2018 project cycle, we had a number of projects that were funded here. There's 9 that we implemented. Now there were 10 approved, 1 was withdrawn, but there were 9 that were successfully implemented over the period of time. And again, this cycle has been closed and those projects were concluded, and we're happy about that. The third cycle, which is 2019, 19 projects here were approved for funding, or maybe 20 were approved for funding. However, 1 was withdrawn, and we continued with 19 projects. And normally the timescales of projects run over a year. But as you will be aware, as a result of the events of last year, there was COVID and the COVID outbreak, and it had an impact on these projects. It has been indicated by the chair, and the impact of COVID is that this project could not be completed at the time that they were initially planned to be completed by. A space was given for states to be able to reschedule their projects with a view of ensuring that they are able to accommodate the COVID impact in a manner without necessarily disrupting their project activities. But we are happy to report that despite all of that, we have 9 projects in this cycle which have been concluded, and the balance are currently underway. But what we do note which is a point that I would want to state, Mr. President, is that, well, from our perspective, there is an impact of COVID. One, it has disrupted the projects, planned projects. But what does that mean? What it means to us is that treaty implementation with respect to those projects has been delayed. But two, if projects are delayed, it's got implications for the administrative capacity that we run. Simply because projects that could have been concluded at this time are still running. So the Secretariat would, at some point, instead of running 2 cycles of projects, but will be running 3 cycles, 2019, 2020, as well as 2021. So it's got an impact on the capacity that the Secretariat has. But these are consequences of COVID-19. It impacts us differently. And I think this is an impact insofar as the VTF operations are concerned. In the 2020, which is a 4th cycle, we have 10 projects approved and 9 are continuing at this point in time, and these are currently underway. And finally, this has already been touched by the by the chair. We have 2021 received applications, and these applications, if you look at them in terms of cost, if all of them were to be approved, they would set us back by about 1.9 million. We have money in the kitty to cover that for this year. And of course, we are grateful then that we have this strong financial position. But the interesting point I want to bring to the attention of the meeting is that the breakdown of the applications that we've received are as follows. We have received 21 applications, and 13 of them are states parties, 3 of them are signatory states, and 4 of them are states that have not yet joined the ATT. So the ATT or the VTF has got a particular attraction beyond those state parties and signatory states. And we do hope that as a result of other states who have not yet joined the ATT, getting support from the VTF, they'll be able to get closer to the ATT, thus advancing the objectives of treaty universalization. In terms of regions, as I had said, the footprint of the VTF is quite wide, and we've received applications from 4 or 5 regions. We have received 10 applications from Africa, 6 from the Americas, 1 from Europe, 2 from Asia, and 1 from Oceania. Mr. President, this is the status of the VTF in terms of finances and in terms of the status of projects. And I say this in complementing the presentation that was made by the chair of the VTF Selection Committee. I thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and I join the head of Secretariat in thanking the generous donors to this very important fund. As you rightly mentioned, these funds have been quite effective, both in terms of treaty implementation, but also in terms of universalization. And we hope that they'll become even more effective as we go on. I have 2 delegations here on my list of speakers. I'll call your names out now. I have Mexico and I have Chile. The floor is open, Mexico, for you, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me properly? I'd like to thank you for the information you have just submitted to us. And obviously, I'd also like to acknowledge the good job of the chair of the voluntary fund. The current status of the fund shows that it's an effective mechanism to mobilize funds and technical cooperation in order to advance in the full and effective implementation of the ATT. We need to continue pursuing in this manner, as the lack of capacity or technical knowledge can limit the implementation of the treaty. In this sense, the fund is an instrument that galvanizes the commitment and contributions of states to help in the implementation of the treaty. That is why we have always firmly supported the fund. Within the collective efforts of advancing in the implementation of the treaty, we believe that we need to share conclusions and best practices learned from the different projects that have been executed by the voluntary fund. This is key to better understand and identify the projects that have worked and that could be replicated in other national or regional contexts. To this effect, we would ask the Secretariat to help us in widely sharing lessons learned from these projects in order to help in the effective implementation of the treaty. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you. The floor is now open for the delegation from Chile, please.
Muchas gracias, distinguido presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear members of the Selection Committee of the Voluntary Fund, delegates, excellencies, special guests. I'm speaking on behalf of Chile and Colombia. The international community has largely advanced in international security, but we still face challenges derived from how easily criminal organizations adapt to new opportunities. In this sense, the diversion and illicit trade of conventional weapons and their parts, components, and munitions concern and affect sustainable development, international peace, and security. It's a threat that affects all countries, regardless of their position in the chain of transfers, and deeply affects citizens' lives. We need to take a responsible action. Governments at a national and regional level have to step up to respond to this challenge and intervene in line with Objective 16 of the Sustainable Development Goals. To this effect, the Voluntary Fund is one of the instruments that states have. As a signatory of the ATT, and together with Small Arms Survey, Colombia and Chile submit a new project, which is an activity that both countries jointly will develop as an expression of how well we can collaborate. Through this project, our countries will strengthen our national institutions competent in inspection and confiscation of weapons will count with the help of Small Arms Survey, who is very well known in the ATT. This project will also help in advancing the implementation of the treaty and will raise awareness about the importance of the instrument. We hope that the legislative process to ratify the treaty will be swift in Colombia. We'd like to call upon the members of the committee so that together, or in accordance with the mandate approved in 2016, our project will receive enough funds to be carried out. We also invite the rest of the state parties to continue contributing to the Voluntary Fund, as this is a key instrument to help in the implementation of the articles of the treaty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chile and Colombia. presentation. Thank you so very much. Do we have any other delegation wanting to say something, to take the floor? Will Colombia like to make a separate statement in addition to the statement that Chile has made on behalf of both Chile and Colombia?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you very much.
Thank you, Colombia. Thank you. Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Permítame iniciar esta intervención.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the government of Chile for their commitment to jointly work with us, and to Small Arms Survey, who will also be working with us in this capacity building project to identify and respond to diversion of conventional arms. The ATT offers us different fora to strengthen cooperation among states to jointly identify answers against the challenges that jeopardize international security and peace. These type of projects are key for countries like Colombia, who are committed with the implementation of the treaty. As we have shared with you in previous occasions, if ratification is delayed, these are linked to the form of the process, but it does not affect our commitment with the body and the objectives of the treaty. We will continue seeking alliances that will allow us to prepare ourselves for the full implementation of the treaty once it has been ratified. As well as this project, which we have submitted to the VTF, I'd also like to illustrate another of our activities in which we participate. A project which is carried out by the BAFTA office from Germany. We'd like to thank all of you for all the efforts to eradicate illicit trade of conventional weapons and diversion of arms. Thank you very much, Chair.
I thank the delegation of Colombia for the presentation. It seems there's no other delegation ready or willing to take the floor. In that case, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would now like to invite the chair of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation, Ambassador Lim of the Republic of Korea, to give us the report of the Working Group, including its 3 sub-working groups. Ambassador Lim, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by expressing my deep thanks to the 3 facilitators on Article 6 and 7, 9 and 11. You each conducted your sessions in unusual and challenging circumstances, and I commend you on your efforts. I would also like to express my thanks to you, the participants, for your active and engaging participation in the meetings of the Working Group on Effective Treaty Implementation. My sense is that each of the sub-working groups has taken forward the matters under review to the extent possible in light of the circumstances and the shortened time frame for the meetings. And I am also pleased that last month, state parties were able to agree on and welcome the multi-year work plans for each of the sub-working groups. This will allow us to take our work forward with a level of certainty and confidence that we are working towards shared objectives. I am going to give you a very brief recap of what the facilitators have informed me they think are the main point arising out of the various discussions. And then I'm going to talk about next steps in the process. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 6 and 7, facilitated by Ambassador Sanchez of Spain, The facilitator provided a brief presentation of the findings of his report on the methodology for the exchange of good practices for the exercise of interpreting some key concepts of Article 6 and 7 in compliance with the mandate of Conference of State Parties. The methodology was ambitious and complex, as that was the nature of the exercise. Contributions from 20 state parties, 1 regional organization, and 3 non-governmental organizations were analyzed. The report confirms that ideas and concepts of some national practices are generally similar beyond nuances and variations. This was an exercise in the exchange of good practices and was not intended to prescribe or agree on a single interpretation of key concepts, nor to create new norms and standards. The result is a certain interpretive homogeneity with different sensibilities, a unity of criteria in variety of nuances. 2 presentations were made with a view to helping delegations understand the concept from complementary perspectives, and these were the first, the serious violations of international humanitarian law by Ms. Maya Brem, legal advisor, the Arms Unit, legal division of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and secondly, the serious violations of international human rights law by Professor Andrew Clapham, Professor of International Law, Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. During the open debate, delegations considered positively the outcome of the exercise, especially the fact that it does not establish new obligations or prescriptions. Many delegations emphasized that we must remain vigilant in order not to reinterpret concepts that already have an accepted international definition. Delegations also discussed the available international, multilateral, and regional instruments, as well as existing academic publications. Some participants raised concerns about the low number of contributions received, which makes the findings of exercise inconclusive. Other delegations emphasized that national application of the concept must be exercised in good faith. The role of the civil society was considered valuable as they provide independent views that help highlight gaps and vulnerabilities. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 9, facilitated by Mr. Rob Rensley of South Africa, the second meeting of this relatively new sub-working group began the substantive work of the group and focused on 2 preliminary topics: a discussion on national approaches to the terms transit and transshipment, and a discussion on the phrases under its jurisdiction and through its territory in accordance with international law. The facilitator steered the discussions on the first topic using as a guide 3 questions designed to elicit information on national approaches to the terms transit and transshipment, and whether and to what extent states distinguished between them. Dr. Dedrick Kops of Flemish Peace Institute gave a kick-off presentation on transit controls of military goods in 7 European countries based on the study the Institute is conducting. In the discussions that followed, the facilitator emphasized the importance of sharing information on national practices in order that state parties may draw on what they perceive to be common practices. Several states explained their national approaches to the defining and regulating transit and transshipment, including the challenges associated with efforts to reinforce the transit control at the national level and the need for international cooperation. Participants also heard how other international conventions approach and consider the issue of transit and transshipment. With respect to the second topic under discussion, Professor Anna Patrick of the University of Basel gave a kick-off presentation on the implications of the phrases under its jurisdiction and through its territory in accordance with international law from a law of the sea perspective. The presenter gave a comprehensive overview of the law in this area and highlighted many areas where further work by the group will be needed to clarify the relationship between Article 9 and existing international law and to harness common understandings of these legal concepts so that state parties may operationalize them in their treaty implementation efforts. The facilitator emphasized that his focus for the sub-working group is to see where the group can reach common understandings on the terms contained in Article 9. He raised the possibility of exploring the development of a compendium of national practice and old voluntary guide in the context of the article, while the sub-working group, the sub-working group on Article 9 to support the implementation of this article, while noting that this may be an easier task in the context of the second topic compared to the first topic. In the meeting of the sub-working group on Article 11, facilitated by Ms. Stella Petrovic of Slovenia, the meeting began with an overview by the facilitator of her draft paper outlining elements of a process for assessing the risk of diversion based on the discussions took place during the meeting of the sub-working group in February 2020. In the exchange that followed, participants reflected on the complementarity of the draft paper with other documents produced by the sub-working group, including the list of possible reference documents to be considered by state parties to prevent and address diversion, and possible measures to prevent and address diversion that welcomed by CS4. The possibility of including diversion risk assessment indicators in the draft paper was mentioned. In terms of the next steps, facilitator clarified that the paper serves as a summary of discussions so far, and the separate document will be put to state parties for consideration at the 7th Conference of State Parties. Following a discussion of the facilitator's paper, participants continue to explore the practicalities associated with assessing the risk of diversion of an export and possible establishment of mitigation measures. Participants were invited to examine a series of questions aimed at exploring state practice with respect to assessing the risk of diversion and information exchange mechanisms. They noted the important role of industry as both partners and responsible parties in arms transfers, as well as the role of civil society in providing information and raising awareness on diversion risks. Several participants also noted the potential role of ATT national point of contact in the risk assessment process, and this may be any area for further explorations. Participants also noted the importance of sharing information on end use and other documentation requirements among states to aid the process of documentation certification. Indeed, this idea of sharing EUC templates on a voluntary basis was raised in the previous meeting of this group, and it seems there is a scope for further discussion on the important issue of end-use documentation. Several delegations also reflected on the importance of improving of delivery verification measures, with Canada announcing that it is elaborating a working paper on a post-delivery verification measures to be tabled at CSP7. So it seems there is a work already underway on this important issue, which is scheduled for focused discussion by this sub-working group next year in accordance with multi-year work plan. Finally, they welcomed the newly created Diversion Information Exchange Forum and noted the need for meaningful engagement in the forum. Regarding the next step, we will, in collaboration with facilitators, consider all of the suggestions and the broader discussions arising from sub-working groups. Our plan is then to the following. In the context of sub-working group on Article 6 and 7, the facilitator will begin his work on a list of possible draft elements for Chapter 1 the key concepts of the proposed voluntary guide to assist the state parties in implementing Articles 6 and 7. These draft elements will be derived from the contributions received from state parties to the methodology template exercise and the views exchanged during the discussions held so far. And the facilitator will present this at first the meeting of the sub-working group in the CSP8 cycle next year, and thereafter commence focused discussions on Article 6 obligations as contemplated in the multi-year plan. With respect to the sub-working group on Article 9, the facilitator will begin preparations for a more in-depth look at the measures to regulate the transit and transshipment of arms by land, which will be the focus of the next meeting of sub-working group in the CSP8 cycle. In the context of sub-working group on Article 11, the facilitator will circulate a draft paper outlining the elements of process for assessing the risk of diversion for consideration in CSP7. With that, I thank you all once again for your contributions and suggestions to our discussions. I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person in the near future. Thank you very much.
I thank you very much, Ambassador Lim, for the comprehensive and insightful presentation. I do not have any delegation that has signed up to intervene after this presentation, but the floor is open in case anyone who hasn't signed up would like to make a statement now, any delegation.
Mr. President, we have Rexa from the chart function. Rexa. Yes.
The floor is open, Rexa, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving the Regional Center on Small Arms and Light Weapons in the Great Lakes region, one of African bordering states, Rexa, the opportunity to speak during this session. At the outset, I wish to recall that Rexa is an organization mandated by states to coordinate the implementation of the Nairobi Protocol on the prevention, reduction, control, and management of small arms and light weapons. The thematic focus of CSP7 on strengthening efforts to eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons and to ensure efficient stockpile management is an opportunity to prevent diversion, bolster cooperation, assistance in strengthening stockpile security, and explore synergies with other instruments. There is a need for state parties to ensure arms are delivered to their intended recipient because weapons, upon arrival, if not regulated, the arms transferred could result in armed violence and conflict. The Nairobi Protocol, in Article 10, emphasizes on member states to establish and maintain an effective system and documentation on import, export, transfer, and the transit of small arms and light weapons. Focusing on the magnitude of the affected and those suffering from the scourge of the illicit spread of arms and ammunition should challenge the international community to achieve an effective and enforceable arms trade treaty. To achieve a strong, effective, and comprehensive ATT, the international community should not neglect the importance of regional organizations who bring in their strong capacity in harmonizing and uniformity in the ATT process among the state parties and non-state parties. Rexa reaffirms its full support to fostering responsible policies with regard to the regulation of the arms trade and to prevent and countering the proliferation of illicit arms and ammunition. Rexa continues to actively implement its outreach and assistance activities in a number of its member states to build capacity for effective national implementation and attracting new states to adhere to the ATT. We believe that robust implementation of the ATT will overcome the consequences of weapons diverted from stockpiles, thus fueling conflict. In this regard, we believe that concerted efforts to raise awareness among member states targeting decision and policymakers by sharing experiences, good practice, and information to support the development of guidelines of ratification and implementation, spelling out the steps and indicators for uniformity in the process of actualizing the ATT. We believe that we need to encourage establishing of a mechanism to review progress of the work of member states and enhance continuity of efforts on goals and guidelines relating to gender. Thirdly, strengthening the regulatory framework governing the international trade in small arms and light weapons, and ensuring that these do not fall into the hands of those who would use them in violation of the treaty's principles, with the help of regional organizations and civil society and other experts to assist state parties in fulfilling their reporting obligations. Lastly, create a platform whereby the success stories of the ATT can be shared and highlighted, given that despite the general incremental nature of progress, many positive changes have taken place as a result of the exchanges that have taken place on technical issues and sharing of best practices, and encourage ATT champions nationally. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rexa. I would like to thank the brother for the very insightful intervention. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have another, any other delegation wanting to take the floor? I don't want to jump anyone. In the absence of any other speaker, I would like to thank Ambassador Lim profusely for his presentation and for the great work he has been doing. Thank you very much, and continue the good work. Thank you, Ambassador. Distinguished delegates, I now invite the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, Mr. Alexandro Alba of Mexico and Ms. Julia Vladescu of Romania, to give us their report.
Thank you, Mr. President. The co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting would like to commend you, Mr. President, and the ATT Secretariat for the organization of this series of successful meetings that have helped us progress with our work in spite of the challenging circumstances, and are pleased to report on the status of discussions during the working group session. On the 28th and 29th of April, the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting held its meeting as part of the preparatory process of the 7th Conference of States Parties. The meeting started with the adoption of the draft annotated agenda that was based on the standing agenda items and the recurring and specific tasks for the working group endorsed by states parties at CSP6 and adjusted to fit the reduced time allocated to the meeting due to its exceptional and unprecedented virtual format. The working group also considered the introductory paper of the co-chairs, which provided the background of the given tasks, summarized past deliberations, set out elements for discussion, and put a number of proposals for consideration by the working group participants. The main topics that were addressed in the meeting were the following: the state of play of compliance with reporting obligations, challenges concerning reporting, substantive reporting and transparency issues, organizational means for information exchange, and IT platform reporting and transparency functionalities. The working group reviewed the status of reporting through a presentation by the ATT Secretariat, which demonstrated that despite some progress has been made since the last update on the matter, both the decreasing annual and initial reporting rates are still a cause of concern. Besides, private reporting continues to pose challenges and undermine the treaty's objective of transparency. In this context, several participants expressed concerns about the low rate of reporting, and there were various calls to states parties to make the reports publicly available. Some participants also drew attention on the lack of updated initial reports, given the obligation states parties have to report, to the ATT Secretariat any new measure undertaken in order to implement the treaty. With regard to challenges concerning reporting, the co-chairs firstly invited participants to share any challenges to submitting timely and accurate initial and annual reports they were facing. Participants acknowledged that the global pandemic may had also presented a series of challenges to reporting in the ATT. One participant informed that the main challenge many states parties have is related to the collection and verification of information due to their limited availability, or the fact that data may be scattered between different governmental agencies. Another participant also pointed out that from its own experience, interagency cooperation is essential to facilitating reporting. Another one expressed that among factors like those already mentioned, the lack of political commitment is affecting reporting in the ATT. Secondly, the co-chairs reported on the actions undertaken by the presidents of CSP6 and CSP7 to engage in bilateral contacts with states parties that are in arrears with their reporting obligations, from which it is observed that the number of states who are being asked to comply with this obligation has only increased. After that, states parties, civil society, and regional organizations were asked to brief the working group about any information sessions or promotional events on reporting that they had held since CSP6, and about any other initiative focused on enhancing compliance with the reporting requirements. One participant organization informed about the extension of its outreach program that supports initiatives aiming at strengthening national reporting capabilities and making national reporting procedures more efficient in line with the provisions of the treaty. Two states parties informed about their outreach efforts conducted this year, namely the organization of a virtual event on the topic of reporting for Latin American countries, and of a webinar dedicated to the ATT annual report and the existing assistance on how to prepare the report, which is available online. Another state party referred to the peer-to-peer voluntary assistance event last year and proposed the organization of a similar event in a virtual setting. The session was informed with the experience of a state party who shared about the approval of a project funded by the VTF, by which it seeks to strengthen its reporting capacities and the quality of its reports and improve interagency cooperation. Subsequently, participants had the opportunity to submit proposals for alterations or additional questions and answers to the Q&A type guidance document on the annual reporting obligation. No specific proposals were made on this document, neither during the meeting nor via email or the information exchange platform. Therefore, the co-chairs decided to leave open the possibility to submit proposals or contributions via email or the information exchange platform until the 9th of July of this year, with the intention that such proposals would be discussed in the CSP8 cycle. Afterwards, participants discussed the proposed adjustments to the initial and annual reporting templates. In this regard, the co-chairs gave an overview of the most relevant explanations of these proposed changes, as included in annexes A and B of their introductory paper, and asked participants to share their views on the matter. The majority of delegations that took the floor appreciated the explanatory notes and also expressed favorable opinions on the suggested adjustments, noting that they contribute to address inconsistencies and gaps in the current templates. It was also stressed that the proposed changes also contribute to improving transparency. Changes on public availability, synergies with the UN Register of Conventional Arms, voluntary nature, and alignment with the issue of gender and gender-based violence, among others, were particularly welcomed. One state party mentioned the need to carry out this process in the long term so as not to affect the comparability of data over time. And another state party expressed the opinion that careful consideration shall be given to not imposing additional burdens on state parties regarding their reporting obligations. Some delegations explained that they were still assessing the proposed amendments and they would provide specific comments in writing. The co-chairs look forward to receiving written comments on the subject. They will take a very good consideration of all the comments and remarks expressed and will provide a proposal on how to follow up with this task in the period ahead to the CSP7. Under the agenda item on substantive reporting and transparency issues, there were substantive discussions on the public availability of annual and initial reports and the aggregation of data in annual reports. In the first discussion, a state party shared the premise on which its decision to maintain reporting among state parties of the treaty was founded. It explained, among others, that from its perspective, unlike the UN Register of Conventional Arms, which is a voluntary reporting instrument for transparency purposes, the ATT is a legally binding treaty with an interactive mechanism aimed at streamlining export controls guidelines among state parties through reporting inter alia. The second discussion about aggregation of data in the reports was informed by a presentation from UNIDIR. The experts spoke about the existing voluntary guidance, the national practices observed in data aggregation, the challenges that states have, and possible areas of opportunity to continue dialogue on this topic. Under the agenda item on organizational means for information exchange, a state party suggested the possibility of including a feature that allows a public part in the information exchange platform. As part of the discussion on the three-tier approach to sharing information on diversion, the chair of the Diversion Information Exchange Forum reported on the new public webpage on the ATT website dedicated to the forum, which contains the terms of reference of the said forum, and also providing an update on the status of the arrangements for the first meeting of the forum and the prospects for its first meeting in the current CSP7 cycle, and encouraged the continued exchange of information through other mechanisms, such as the IT platform. Under the agenda item on reporting and transparency functionalities of the IT platform, participants had the opportunity to signal any problems or inconveniences detected in the use of the information exchange platform or the online reporting tool located in the restricted area of the ATT website. No particular problems or inconveniences were signaled during the meeting. Besides, the ATT Secretariat presented a background document containing questions that state parties could consider in determining the parameters for a searchable online database. The project was generally well received by the participants, although it was mentioned that it is necessary for state parties to define the purpose of the said database in order to advance in the development of the project. A next step to be considered by participants after defining the parameters and features of the proposed instrument may be a discussion on the cost-benefit of the project. The co-chairs consider that the deliberations of the meeting were meaningful, and they will reflect them accordingly in the summary report of the meeting, in which they will also make proposals on how to advance the work of the ATT in the area of transparency and reporting, in order to ensure a good preparation of the decisions that will be submitted for the consideration of CSP7. Before closing, please allow me to thank once again to all participants for their engagement in the discussions of the meeting. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether your colleague will also like to brief.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, I just want to echo what my co-chair has mentioned. I thank you very much for your support and the support of the Secretariat. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vladisco and Mr. Alba for the very comprehensive report presented. I would now like to open the floor for delegations who would like to make comments on the report of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting. I don't have anyone on my, I don't have anyone who has pre-signed up for this, but if there's any speaker who would like to take the floor, you are welcome to do so now.
Mr. President, I confirm that we have not received a request for the floor from the chat room.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. So let me once again thank the co-chairs of the Working Group on Transparency and Reporting, and then distinguished delegates, Excellencies. I will now invite the co-chair of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization, Ambassador Federico Villegas of Argentina, to join me in providing the report of the Working Group. As I mentioned earlier, I would like to brief this meeting about the universalization efforts of the CSP7 presidency since we came into office in August last year. After that, Ambassador Villegas will provide the progress of the Working Group on Treaty Universalization following our meeting on Tuesday this week. I now begin my briefing. As president of the 7th Conference of States Parties to the ATT, one of my priorities has been to encourage states that have not joined the treaty to do so at the earliest. In this regard, once again, I formally welcome Namibia, China, Sao Tome and Principe, Afghanistan, and Niue, who joined the treaty last year and whose accessions and ratifications were not properly celebrated at the 6th Conference of States Parties due to the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. Since coming into office, the presidency has undertaken a number of activities related to treaty universalization. Sierra Leone facilitated the preparation and processing of the 2020 ATT resolution at the First Committee of the United Nations General Assembly, and that was supported by 150 states. In conformity with the restrictions imposed by COVID-19 pandemic, and after consultations with my president, His Excellency Dr. Julius Maada of Sierra Leone, we decided to write a letter to heads of states whose countries are not yet state parties, encouraging them to join this important arms control instrument. The president of Sierra Leone signed the letter, and those letters were brought back, and I personally hand-delivered them. To organize the work on universalization effectively, we adopted a strategy of prioritization, separating non-state parties into 2 groups. The first groups include states we consider to be close to joining the treaty based on advancements made at the national level, including, but not limited to, signing and ratifying the treaty. And the second group being those states indicating that joining the ATT is probably a slightly longer prospect. To date, as I mentioned, I have personally hand-delivered my president's letter to ambassadors and permanent representatives of 24 non states parties, including 13 states from Africa, 7 states from Asia, 1 state from Europe, 1 state from the Americas, and 2 states from Oceania. Some of these letters I submitted at the missions and some at the residencies of the ambassadors and permanent representatives. I further directly sent out 29 letters to diplomatic missions and consular offices of the remaining states. While speaking directly with countries concerning their progress towards joining the ATT and where they are encountering challenges doing so, one common theme emerged, which is the need for cooperation and assistance. Achieving the objectives of the ATT requires ensuring that all states parties have the necessary resources to effectively implement the treaty. I'm grateful to those states parties serving on the Voluntary Trust Fund Committee and those donors that provide financial assistance to this important fund in support of the treaty's implementation. They are extremely critical both to the treaty's implementation as well as to the universalization efforts of the ATT. There was also security concerns posed by neighboring states. That was one of the challenges some of the countries we met spoke about. And there were bureaucratic hurdles, and there were misconceptions, which at every opportunity I tried to debunk, that the ATT will impair the ability of states to arm themselves for legitimate purposes. Some of the issues raised, these were some of the issues raised by ambassadors, representatives when we met them. The other issue had to do with the universalization of treaties, a shared responsibility of all states. I call on you to adopt measures and support efforts to promote the treaty's universalization. Universalization is not just the work of the presidency or the working group on it. It is the responsibility of all of us, and we all must make efforts to work towards that common goal. I thank you, and I will now invite Ambassador Villegas to provide a progress report of the working group on treaty universalization. I hand the floor over to my colleague and the distinguished ambassador of Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Berry. And if you allow me, so for all of you to practice your Spanish also, I will switch to Spanish. From now on. Thank you. The
working group on universalization held its first meeting on Tuesday, 27 April of this year, 2021. The meeting was attended by 210 delegates, including representatives from states, international organizations, regional organizations, civil society, and industry organizations. The following aspects were discussed during the meeting. The chair of CSP7 summarized the activities that had been carried out in relation to universalization. The two co-chairs highlighted their respective and joint universalization activities undertaken since CSP6. They took advantage of key events such as the United Nations General Assembly First Committee meeting in New York and carried out bilateral meetings in the intersessional period. The head of the ATT Secretariat provided an update on the status of treaty ratifications, accessions, and signatures, as well as a regional breakdown of treaty participation. The ATT Secretariat's presentation, which I invite you to read, is available on the ATT official webpage. Some states provided updates on their universalization activities undertaken since CSP6. They shared information on their national activities, as well as the efforts to harmonize their national legislation with the treaty's obligations as a precondition to ratification. They also discussed bilateral outreach meetings, regional workshops, as well as assistance received and provided to support their efforts to join the treaty. Likewise, participants highlighted the importance of international cooperation and assistance in assisting countries to strengthen their national capacities to fulfill their obligations under the treaty. Another states party underlined, among other things, the importance of carrying out outreach activities to parliamentarians in countries who are likely to ratify or accede to the treaty. Several proposals were made to strengthen the coordination of universalization efforts. For instance, there was a proposal to hold informal meetings in advance of CSP7 in order to facilitate enhanced coordination and collaboration among ATT office holders and state parties on treaty universalization strategies. Other states highlighted that the efforts should focus on arms exporting and importing countries, as well as in those regions with a limited ATT engagement. A state party informed the participants of its contribution to treaty universalization through the Human Rights Council Universal Periodic Review. We heard from the European Union that it will fund the publication and printing of the ATT Universalization Toolkit. The EU noted that the toolkit will be published in a brochure in advance of CSP7. And we were reminded that the Republic of Korea funded the translation of this toolkit, as well as the welcome pack, into several Asian languages in 2020. We thank these delegations for their generosity and ongoing efforts to support treaty universalization. A signatory state informed that it was making efforts to harmonize their national legislation with the treaty's obligations, and added that its government is working on ratifying the treaty as soon as the necessary conditions were met. Some delegations highlighted the important role played by civil society in ATT outreach activities. And a civil society member presented the efforts it has undertaken to promote ATT universalization in the regions of Asia-Pacific, Middle East, North of Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, while highlighting the need for more assistance to be provided to countries of those regions. We were reminded that all stakeholders have an important role to play in promoting and achieving universalization of the ATT. As regards the way forward, and in conclusion, Chair, both co-chairs of the Working Group on Universalization announced that they were coordinating actions in order to redouble efforts towards treaty universalization. In this regard, the co-chairs are planning joint outreach initiatives in the lead-up to CSP7. We encourage the ATT community to collaborate with the co-chairs in this collective effort. Lastly, Chair, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for all its work, and I'd like to acknowledge your support, Chair. We all have a responsibility we have to live up to in promoting treaty universalization. The nature of this treaty means that its full and effective implementation will only be possible in its scope and mission if it becomes a universal instrument. There are other treaties where only several states have to act upon their responsibility to fulfill the obligations of that treaty, but to the contrary of those instruments, this treaty requires our joint responsibility to fulfill the implementation of this treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villegas. Thank you. And I really appreciate the joint work we've been doing together. You've been extremely supportive and very dedicated to these tasks. Thank you so very much. I would now like to open the floor for delegations who would like to make comments on the working group on treaty universalization. We don't seem to have anyone currently on the list. But has there been any indication? There seems to be no indications of somebody wanting to take the floor, a delegation to want to. So this concludes our section on treaty universalization. And I would like to once again thank my co-chair, Ambassador Villegas of Argentina, for the great work that we've been doing on this one. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at this stage, I would like to proceed to the Management Committee to update us on this work thus far. Before inviting the Management Committee to present this work, I think it is prudent for participants to be firstly appraised of ATT's finances. So accordingly, I would like to invite the head of the ATT Secretariat to give us an overview presentation on the status of ATT finances, including the ATT sponsorship program. Mr. Secretary, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take this opportunity to provide a status report on the finances of the ATT, as requested by the President. The administration of the ATT finances is generally governed by the ATT financial rules, and they form the basis of the administration of the finances of the ATT. I wish to highlight that in the financial rule number 5 and number 6 of the ATT financial rules basically set the formula that we apply in the determination of assessed contributions by states. However, in the consideration of the calculation of assessed contributions, there's quite a number of factors that are put into the equation or taken into account. And those include, amongst others, the CSP approved budget, because you can only assess on the basis of an approved budget by a CSP. And secondly, we also have to look at the number of states parties that are there in the ATT. Thirdly, we look at the number of states who have attended a last CSP, meaning observer states or other states, as it were. And we are required by the financial rules to also look at the scale of our UN, or the UN scale of assessment, because that is very important to ensure that there is equity in the manner in which states are assessed. And finally, we also look at the scale of effort of the ATT, the level of ambition that we would want to adopt in terms of the activities to be undertaken in any given financial year. The ATT process is largely, or conference as well as secretariat, is funded exclusively for financial contributions coming from states. There is no any other source of finance that we have. It derives from states. And there are different categories of states. First, it's states parties who are essentially carrying the most burden. States parties therefore carry the responsibility of making contributions towards conference costs, as well as the cost of the ATT Secretariat. However, signatory states and observer states only make contributions towards part of the cost of the ATT. And they contribute towards a conference cost, which we call the attendance fee. And they also contribute a percentage of the ATT Secretariat activities conducted concerning the organization of work of conference. And that at present is set at 30% of the contributions. The financial management process of the ATT finances is, as I said, is predicated on the provisions of the financial rules. But I need to take the opportunity and just highlight some of these important features of this process, and they are, and I will summarize over here. The ATT, as determined by the financial rules, the financial period here, or a financial year, is actually a calendar year. So when we talk about a financial period, we talk about a calendar year, which is January to the end of the year, January to December. And as a matter of course, the budget estimates that we present as a secretariat are adopted, or they need to be approved by CSP. And on the basis of an approved budget estimates, we issue invoices in October of every year in accordance with rule number 8 of the ATT financial rules. And the invoices that are issued in October are payable within 3 months of receipt. And that is basically by the end of January of the following year. We send out reminders in March of every year on the basis of the status of states that would have made their contributions. And these reminders go under the signature of the president of conference. And this year we have done same. And letters were sent to the affected states. And the status of ATT contributions is reflected on regular basis on the ATT website. It's available for states to have a look at. And also as part of the process of managing finances, we also have what has come to be known as a rollover register, which you post on the website and is updated on a yearly basis. What it is a document that details how we approach the issue of rollover of contributions in terms of how much is to be rolled over, how much has been rolled over, and how much is left per each state. And if you look at the website, you'll find details of how we are dealing with this question. CSP6 made a decision, and I've reflected that in the first presentation, but there was an adoption of the budget estimate for 2021, comprising of the 2 elements, as said, secretariat budget, as well as that of conference. And on the basis of what I've said, now I'm going to reflect to you what is the status of contribution in terms of actual contributions received. And I must say that we have now run about on year number 6, financial year number 6, and the slide is getting a little bit complicated because of the number of years that we have to cover. But my focus is largely on 2021 budget, and the other years are there for your view at your own convenience. Conference approved a budget. I'm just reading the last column, starting from the top to the bottom, just to get the context right. Budget approved was over $1 million US to cover conference as well as secretariat costs. What we have received at this point in time from states is 920,000. However, we still have to receive from our states who were invoiced an amount of 147,000. That is still outstanding. But if you look at the rate of payment in terms of percentage, the 920,000 received at this point translates into 86% in terms of payment rate. And further down, we're indicating the number of states that we have invoiced or assessed, the 121. But those that have paid out of the 121 are actually 62, which translates to about 51%. The line at the bottom, and we always highlight that to give that a different color because it represents or it shows the in-kind contribution that the ATT Secretariat and the ATT framework receives as an in-kind contribution from the government of Switzerland. And you can see over the period of 6 years that is the extent of their commitment towards the ATT. We are grateful to the generosity of the Swiss government with regard to this contribution. But for the year that is under focus, they had contributed 249,000 towards the cost of offices that we're using as a secretariat are funded from that amount of money. So it's not funded by states, but it's funded out of the in-kind contributions. So does our other items like copy machine and the like. But all that it means is that if this contribution was not made by the Swiss government, states would have been assessed for that in addition to their current assessment. So that is why then we extend our words of gratitude to the government of Switzerland. Outstanding contributions, as you can see over there, it covers the number of years, the 6 years I've referred to, but we're also demonstrating the number of states that are still in arrears for the period that we're indicating over here. For the first year, we still have to get some contribution from 26 states who are in arrears. For the second year, 19 states. Third year, 18 states. 2019 is 26 states. Then 2020, 33 states still have to pay some contributions that are outstanding. But for the current year, we still have to receive contributions from 59 states. But what you do see is that we are accumulating a deficit over time. And at this point, money owed to the ATT is almost 500,000. And as you go to the right, and if the pattern of payment is not changed, so we are going to accumulate this and it will grow over and over. I'm going to indicate in the next slide or so the implication of this insofar as the functioning of the operations of the ATT. You'll be reminded that CSP5 took a decision very clearly, reaffirmed the application of our Rule 8.4 of the financial rules. And that rule specifically addresses the question of how we can deal with the issue of rollover of uncommitted balance of appropriations. Basically mean in simple terms, money that had not been spent in any particular year. So that is a balance of appropriation, which is uncommitted. But that would translate therefore to cash and deficits. Basically, if you are rolling over, you roll over the cash that you have received as well as the debt that we are accumulating over time. You will remember that we are still owing certain credits that are due to states for 3 years, 2015-16 as a 1 year, 2017 and 2018. And the decision of conference at the time in CSP5 was that this was to be paid back to states in a period of 5 years. Of course, we have followed that to the letter, and we have, for the past 2 years, 2020 and 2021, rolled money back to states as determined by that financial rule. But here's an impact of it, is that the rollover effected to paid up states is covered by two aspects. Covered by contributions received as well as by deficit. Basically meaning the Secretariat or the ATT is actually paying back to states money that it doesn't have. And as a result of that, the cash that you have for current operations is reduced by the percentage of your deficit. And the deficit, we are at this point, our deficit is at an average of 7%. And over time, therefore, it means our budget would get reduced by 7% over a period of time. What this means is that there is a time when we'll get to a crunchy moment. We'll start to have financial challenges in the medium term we project. But of course, if the pattern of payment changes and we are able to recoup the outstanding financial contributions, these forthcoming difficulty of finances can be avoided. But if the current payment patterns is not changed, we are heading for that financial crisis period. CSP5 established a reserve fund, which was, the orientation of it was to support, was to help to deal with the issues of financial liquidity. But the reserve fund is established out of, or is financed from voluntary contributions by states, voluntary, not assessed, but voluntary. But to date, 3 years on the run, we have not received any contribution towards that. So we're inviting states to consider making contributions towards that, because it will help us to deal with the financial crisis that we're heading towards in the medium term. This is a demonstration of the payment pattern in terms of the number of states having paid per month. It looks pretty busy here. If you read it at your own time, you can. However, the message I want to convey to delegates is that what we observe here is that the critical moments in a year where we received many states make a payment of their invoiced or assessed contributions, it's normally between November and May of every year that you see the most bars going up. But starting from June to the right, you start to have very few states making their contributions over there. The second one, the second slide or the next slide, conveys the percentage of budget that we receive per month and the period within which we receive that. We receive most of our budget over the same period of time, November to April of every year. That is where you see many states starting to make a contribution. The next slide looks at the trend of payments, and we have tried to cast that over the 6 years that we have been managing. The rest is detailed, but what I wish to highlight is the red line. The red line is in relation to 2021, basically saying what has been the payment pattern with regard to the 2021. What we do see over there, if you look at the lines, the red line, it means for contributions towards 2021, we have received the most contributions this year than at any other time in the past. But of course, therefore, it's not yet 100%. It's sitting at about 80-odd%, as I indicated, 86%. But that deficit continues to build. Yes, of course, when we receive most of our money in the manner that is indicated here, it means we may not have financial liquidity challenges in the first part of the year. But as you move to the right, the crunch may come because we have to make up for that difference between 86 as well as 100%. The final slide, Mr. President, is just a cash flow projection because we have to be able to take the money that we have received now and cast that over our plan for the year. We have planned activities for the year as determined by conference. And the biggest cost drivers of the ATT framework are, one is meetings. The cost of meetings is one of the cost drivers that we have. And another cost driver that we have is that related to staff. The Secretariat tries to apply the highest level of prudence in ensuring that the cash that we receive takes us as far as possible. But we can only do as much. We can only contain the cost. But there are certain costs that you cannot actually eliminate. You can only contain them and reduce them so that they can be accommodated within the money that we have. But the message that the slide conveys is that if you take the current money that we have received, and if we do not get additional money, we'll start to have a crunch period around about November and December. So basically there will be shortages of money at that time. And of course, we're very optimistic that there will be further contributions that we receive to avert that crunch time in between November and December in terms of the commitments that we have according to the plan that we are running on the basis of decisions of conference. Mr. President, this is a reflection of the status of finances insofar as assessed contributions are concerned. But I'll take the moment to also, as directed, to look at the sponsorship program. It will take a brief moment. We are, as a Secretariat, responsible for the administration of the sponsorship program, according to the decision of CSP4, which entrusted this function to ourselves. And this decision was reconfirmed last year after a report was presented by the MC about our continuation in this effort. The sponsorship program operates on the basis of guidelines that were approved by conference, which has got two elements: selection criteria as well as financial protocols. And to date, since we assumed this responsibility in 2019, we have received contributions from the states that are indicated on the board. I must say there has been a bit of some flags I can't see there, But I'll take a moment then to read the states that have made contributions to this. Maybe we can use, okay, there you are. Sentence, okay. I take the moment then to read the states that have made contributions to ours. My apologies, I did not press the button 2 times. That is why others did not come. We have received contributions from Australia, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Portugal, Republic of Korea, Switzerland, Sweden. We are grateful to the states who have made contributions towards the sponsorship program, which is focused on supporting participants of meetings. This is a breakdown of the contributions they've made by each state. But the bottom line is that we have received from these states in a period of 3 years, 837,000 at this point. It's a good contribution that we have received, and we are grateful for that. As expected, we have committed the money towards supporting the activities of the sponsorship program. We have received 87,000. We have had an expenditure at this point of 274,000. And we have 562,000 as money that is uncommitted, that is available for us to be able to fund the activities of the sponsorship program in the future. We have Slovenia. All right, I think they've come off. Let me just conclude, Mr. President. I was just saying that we have got money in the kitty, over 500,000, which is uncommitted, and it gives us a good position to be able to fund future activities. But this is an impact of COVID, I must say, therefore, because we couldn't fund delegates last year and up to this time, there's been less expenditure on this front. And of course, if the situation turns and changes for the better, these funds will be easily used. But we are grateful to the donors who have allowed us to have a rollover arrangement with them as part of the grant agreements, because it allows us to keep the money and roll it to the right. Mr. President, these 2 presentations therefore cover the status of finances of the ATT. I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. That presents pretty sobering as well as encouraging picture, and we thank the generous donors once again for their generosity. We need that going forward. I would now like to open the floor for delegations to express their views on the ATT's finances. I see that this particular area has the longest list of speakers, and for very good reasons. And on the list of on this list, the first speaker is actually Sierra Leone in this national capacity. So I call on Mr. Patrick Kroma to speak. What did I? That's management. Oh wait, that's a different one. Excellencies, delegations, there was yes, there was a slight box up. The list of speakers for this section for the finances are rather short. It's rather short. We have number 1, Argentina, and number 2, the Republic of Korea. So I cede the floor to Argentina, please. And my apologies, Sierra Leone, for calling you prematurely. I know you'll be coming up later on. Argentina, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Our delegation would like to thank the Secretariat for the very exhaustive report submitted to this preparatory meeting on the status of the financial situation of the ATT. The Argentinian Republic shares concerns about the financial situation, the current situation of the ATT, which has been clearly shown in the presentation. Argentina supports that the measures taken to improve the financial situation of the ATT should be taken cautiously in order to not imply a loss of rights and a higher financial burden due to the state's parties. In that sense, we support all initiatives to improve the complying timelines of the financial obligations of all state parties. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so very much, Argentina. It appears that the other designated speaker actually wants to focus on I also call that prematurely, and I apologize. I'll get to that later on. Thank you very much, Argentina. It seems to me that the list of speakers is exhausted. So we will have to move on to another section. I would like to thank the head of the Secretariat for this overview once again of the finances of ATT. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, at this moment, I'd like to invite the Management Committee to give us its much anticipated update on this work. Let me say, as way of background, you may recall that CSP5 requested the Management Committee to prepare guidelines on the issue of, quote, arrangements with the Secretariat in relation to the discharge of its financial obligations. Reference is to Financial Rule 8.1d for consideration by CSP6. In accordance with the CSP5 decision, the Management Committee prepared draft guidelines on financial arrangements, which were submitted to CSP6 in the form of draft decision 15 for adoption via silence procedure. Unfortunately, the draft guidelines were not adopted by CSP6. Considering the importance of guidelines for financial arrangements in the context of Rule 8.1d, the CSP7 president, after elaborate consultations, submitted a proposal to 6 parties to extend the mandate of the Management Committee until CSP7 in order to revise the draft guidelines for consideration by CSP7. As you'll be aware, the proposal to extend the mandate of the MC to revise the draft guidelines on the financial arrangements as contemplated in Rule 8.1d was extended by the decision of 6 parties on the 1st of March, 2021. Alongside this decision, 6 parties decided that no state shall be prejudiced by Rule 8.1d in applying for support from the ATT's Voluntary Trust Fund or the ATT's sponsorship program until CSP7, when this matter will be more carefully considered. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to invite members of the Management Committee, Costa Rica and Germany, to introduce the revised draft guidelines for making financial arrangements under Rule 8.1d of the ATT's financial rules. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, Costa Rica and Germany, please. You may take the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Sierra Leone's ambassador. Costa Rica would like to take the floor, first of all, to thank the Management Committee for giving us the task shared with Germany as representatives of our respective regions in the Management Committee with the task of adjusting the financial arrangement for those states who are in arrears with their financial obligations in the framework of the CSP, to be able to develop the proposal of Rule 8.1d of the financial regulations of the treaty. After an active exchange, technical and political, we are very pleased to submit a revised text before you, a draft agreement, which we trust will help to find a common position between state parties. I would like to thank the representative of Germany for his work and cooperation to be able to submit this revised proposal. Now, we deployed efforts to reflect the concerns that were communicated to us by state parties. And we hope, Costa Rica and Germany hope, that we will count on the support of all the delegations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my good friend, Ambassador Catalina. Will Germany take the floor, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the floor. My dear colleague Catalina Nevandas basically has said it all, and I couldn't say it in better words. So let me just very briefly summarize. I would also like to thank the membership of the Management Committee for entrusting Germany and together with Costa Rica to work out a revised paper on the procedure regarding any repayment plans for countries in arrears. And I can only wholeheartedly agree with the Costa Rican ambassador that after having worked hard, we've come up with a very viable proposal that has already been signed off by the Management Committee. The product, as Catalina says, takes into account comments received from the various constituencies, and I believe it's a good compromise. And I would like expressly to thank Costa Rica for the very, very good cooperation we've had. And I'd like to add, it again bears out the benefits of cross-regional cooperation in these delicate matters. In particular, my gratitude goes to those individuals who actually have done 99.9% of the work, which is Maricela Munoz from the Costa Rican delegation and my colleague Stefan Niefelstein, whom we also right now see. I believe Maricela, unfortunately, isn't able to co-present the result today. So in a little while, I believe on behalf of our two delegations, Stefan will walk us through the proposal in a little more detail, and we believe it is ready and worthwhile for adoption at the next conference. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Barrow. Thank you. Thank you. Could we have the delegation from Germany present the paper, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I try to share my screen in a second so that we can then easily see what, excuse me for a moment. That's always the same. I'm struggling a bit with the, Dumisani, can we take it from as the backup from your end?
Yes, I think we are setting it up from this side.
Yeah, because it's always the same. If you try something new at the, let's say, at a conference, you have to try it multiple times beforehand. So I apologize for that. But as we now have a backup available, we can easily go to slide 3, please. So we can start from slide 3.
Just give us a moment,
Yeah.
Stefan.
All right, there we are. Then we can just progress to slide 3, please. Yes, that's just a short indication of why we need this progress so dearly. It's basically providing a helping hand for any state party that is in arrears for 2 or more years, just to settle the, let's say, financial obligations on the one hand. And the other hand is that the ATT Secretariat itself needs some, let's say, safe grounds upon which it can operate in preparing necessary decisions for the CSP. Next slide, please. And how can we do that? If we look at the Rule 8.1d, it just says, well, any state party that has not entered into arrangements, and I'm not going to read the rest, but it doesn't provide any additional information. So what shall a state party do, and what shall the Secretariat do in the end? And so what we did last year already was to look at other mechanisms that are available out there. And if you look at the United Nations itself, there is a mechanism that indicates the, let's say, possibility to enter into financial arrangements over some years. And that might be the viable instrument also for the ATT to solve some of the financial problems of state parties. Next slide, please. And what we do expect, and that's written out in the procedure, and the document was sent out last week, and I'm not going to read through each and every part. What we envisage is that we receive as ATT or ATT Secretariat a note verbal from a state in arrears of 2 or more years. And this note verbal should contain a multi-year or single-year, single is a bit difficult, but multi-year payment plan with a payment calendar so that the ATT Secretariat can plan on the financial influx. It should have a maximum of 6 years that's taken from the United Nations directly, and an early settlement shall be possible if conditions, let's say, allow for that. Next slide, please. The ATT Secretariat will then, based on this note verbal, prepare a proposal for a decision that is to be taken at the next following CSP. And it's only, and this has to be, let's say, reiterated, it's only the CSP that decides. If we have a positive decision of the CSP and the first installment of this financial arrangement has arrived, then all the applied measures that are laid out in Rule 8.1d will be waived. And subsequently, the Secretariat will monitor the compliance with the financial arrangement. So that's a new task for the Secretariat, but I think they will happily adopt that one as well. Next slide, please. In that case may, of course, arise, in case of non-compliance with the plan, the state party needs, of course, to explain the reasons why. And if these reasons are deemed satisfactory, the financial plan remains active. If, however, the explanation is not satisfactory, the measures, as laid out in 8.1d, will be reapplied immediately. And this decision is the only one that can be taken also intercessionally, just to rule out that a state needs to wait until the next CSP if there's anything going wrong with the plan that has been agreed upon beforehand. That, and you can switch to the next slide, please, that should already end my short presentation, and you will see in the document that we have tried to streamline the whole process to, let's say, make it more balanced and more easily to adopt for state parties. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you for the presentation. I have a fairly long list of speakers wanting to make their contributions on this topic. I currently have 6, Sierra Leone, Mexico, United Kingdom, China, European Union, and the Republic of Korea. So we'll begin with Sierra Leone, please. Mr. Kuruma, you have the floor in your national capacity.
Mr. President, in its national capacity, Sierra Leone thanks the ATT Secretariat for the overview presentation on the status of the ATT finances. Sierra Leone also thanks the Management Committee for its work and presentation on the proposed draft guidelines for making financial arrangements. My delegation appreciates the efforts of the CSP7 president in sending out letters to state parties and others in arrears, reminding them of the need to meet their outstanding assessed financial contributions to the Arms Trade Treaty. In the CSP7 president's letter, we note the president's emphasis, and rightly so, that making timely assessed financial contributions is very important to the efficiency and the realization of the objectives of the Arms Trade Treaty. In the same vein, Sierra Leone welcomes the concerns expressed by CSP5 over unpaid contributions and endorses the calls for states in arrears to address their financial obligations to the Arms Trade Treaty. Sierra Leone believes in the principle of law that agreements or treaty obligations must be performed in full. That said, the measures in Rule 81D of the ATT financial rules for a state in arrears for 2 or more years remain inoperative until conference decides on how the ATT Secretariat should process a request for financial arrangements. In the absence of such a decision by conference, any attempt to implement Rule 81D would be procedurally irregular. Sierra Leone welcomes the procedural steps in paragraphs 1 to 9 in the proposed process for the ATT framework. However, Sierra Leone wishes to express its concerns over the proposals in paragraphs 10 to 13. The revised draft elements for a procedure regarding Rule 81D provide no link between the status of states in financial arrears and the ATT Voluntary Trust Fund and the ATT Sponsorship Program. States may recall that the decision of CSP5 contained in paragraph 36 of CSP5 states that no state shall be prejudiced by financial Rule 81D in applying for sponsorship, for support from the ATT Voluntary Trust Fund or the ATT Sponsorship Program until CSP6, when this matter will be considered. Given this important decision taken by CSP5, Sierra Leone believes that the link between assessed financial contributions and the ATT Voluntary Trust Fund and the ATT sponsorship should be integral in all attempts to develop guidelines on the issue of arrangements. Developing guidelines that may limit access to the trust fund or the sponsorship program could adversely impact the participation of states and effective universalization of the Arms Trade Treaty in regions of the world where it is most needed. Sierra Leone further wishes to note that the proposal for the president of the CSP to send a letter to inform states in arrears that the temporary waiver in relation to measures contemplated in Rule 81D has been withdrawn stands at odds with paragraph 10 in the proposed process for the ATT framework. Proposed paragraph 10 is expressed in terms that apply Rule 81D, unless conference of state parties makes a decision to the contrary. Accordingly, to propose that CSP president will send such a letter makes paragraph 10 stands in conflict with paragraph 12. In conclusion, Mr. President, Sierra Leone stands ready to support the Management Committee in its effort in developing guidelines on the issue of arrangements that will be acceptable to all state parties of the Arms Trade Treaty. I thank you.
I thank you, Sierra Leone, for your contribution. Can we have Mexico take the floor, please?
Muchas gracias, presidente. Espero
Thank
que
you very much, Chair.
puedan oír bien. Quisiera comenzar por reconocer el trabajo del
I'd like to acknowledge the work of the Management Committee, the efforts and consultations that have been carried out and which have given rise to this proposal. So we'd like to thank Maricela, Stefan, and the ambassador for their patience and efforts with all delegations. As is reflected in the document at hand, state parties showed their concern with the arrears still pending in CSP5. I think we are all still worried with this situation. We've tried to be as flexible as possible in trying to apply the financial regulations. The financial difficulties and the instability we are all going through at a national level, as well as the different budget parliamentary processes in place in each country, need to be taken into account by the Secretariat as well as by state parties to come up with a flexible mechanism to settle financial contributions in arrears. The proposal that has been put on the table would put the Secretariat in a better position to assume their financial responsibilities. At the same time, they would give flexibility to states, and I think they would be able to assume a middle-level risk. This mechanism would also allow us to achieve our results and to apply the principle of equity. This will also build confidence among states in fulfilling the obligations derived from the treaty, and will also allow state parties to help in keeping the finances of the organization in a healthy level. The decisions regarding access, or rather non-restriction of access to the voluntary fund or to the sponsorship program, require state parties to take decisions separately on these matters, as we've been doing so far. We stand to continue with ongoing constructive dialogue on this item. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mexico. United Kingdom, you have the floor, please. UK.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. And let me begin by thanking you, the Secretariat, and all the office holders for their efforts to prepare for this week's meetings in the ongoing difficult circumstances. Mr. President, before I address the question at hand, let me just begin by acknowledging the presentation given earlier by the Secretariat, underlining the perilous financial situation our treaty continues to face. This is not fundamentally an issue to do with credits or payment plans, but of all states meeting their obligations to share the costs of the treaty's operation. If states continue to fail to pay their share on time and in full, there will unavoidably be real and serious consequences. If we cannot hold our meetings or pay for the staff of our Secretariat, our treaty cannot achieve its aims and objectives. This is not an abstract accountancy problem. This is a real and present danger. Turning to the proposals before us, Mr. President, on the issue of making financial arrangements with the Secretariat, my delegation welcomes the efforts of Costa Rica and Germany. We support this initiative in principle as a practical way of helping states in arrears for 2 or more years to discharge their financial obligations. Our focus should be to put in place a robust, transparent, and effective mechanism that allows state parties to meet their commitments. This work is going in the right direction, and this draft has improved. We are very grateful for that. There are, however, some elements that could be further clarified, notably in cases of non-compliance with an agreed financial arrangement, as set out in paragraphs 11 and 12, though we note the explanations just given by Colonel Lieberstein. I have to say, though, that my delegation does not see the contradiction between paragraph 10 and paragraph 12 pointed out by the distinguished delegate of Sierra Leone. We stand ready to work closely with the delegations of Costa Rica and Germany and all other interested delegations as we prepare to consider and adopt this measure at CSP7. Let me be clear, Mr. President, though, while we support this initiative, I cannot stress enough that prompt payment is the only way to ensure the financial viability of the treaty. We once again call on all states to comply with their financial obligations on time and in full, in line with the ATT financial rules, whose validity should not be brought into question. Many thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you. Thank you. The great diversity of views are really very important for us to reach a good resolution. Thank you. I now cede the floor to China, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Secretariat for their detailed presentation on this issue. I also appreciate efforts made by Germany and Costa Rica for their work and their presentations. China would like to work with all other state parties and sides to work out this issue. In line that we are participating in the preparation meeting for the first time, we would like to make the following comments related to the financial rules and the financial situation of the treaty. Adequate financial resources are vital for the effective functioning of the treaty regime. China has taken note of the current financial situation of the treaty and hopes that all state parties will treat it as a priority and find solutions to this issue. China would like to recommend the following. First, all state parties should fully meet their financial obligations and make financial payments in time and in full. Second, state parties should strengthen planning and improve financial efficiency of the contributions in order to make the most impact. When managing and using funds, priorities should be given to developing countries' assistance and cooperation needs. As a state party to the treaty and as one of its largest contributors, China will continue to fulfill our obligations. And last year, we made payments in full and in time. In addition, we will continue to fulfill our obligations and make positive contributions to alleviate the financial difficulties faced by the treaty. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, China. I now turn to cede the floor to European Union, please. EU.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate
There seems to be some technical difficulty. We'll come back to European Union. At the moment, can we have the Republic of Korea to take the floor, please?
Thank you for giving me the floor, Ambassador. I appreciate Germany and Costa Rica for their continued efforts to accommodate diverse views on the draft elements of a procedure for financial arrangements in Rule 8.1d throughout last year and for the presentation today. The Republic of Korea views that the draft elements are reasonably prepared to give certainty and clarity to all stakeholders on entering into arrangements with the Secretariat, which are currently missing in the text of Financial Rule 8.1d. The Republic of Korea believes that addressing this ambiguity will help the application of the measures outlined in the Rule 8.1d in a more objective manner, and most importantly, incentivize state parties to pay their contribution in a full and timely manner. Korea is supportive of the Management Committee's draft in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Republic of Korea. I'm not sure whether the European Union delegate is prepared now to make a statement, complete the statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and apologies for the technical difficulties. So let me continue to emphasize that we support the Management Committee in defining a procedure as mandated by CSP5, which will ensure the financial stability of the treaty as an essential part of the effective functioning of the treaty and its institutions. We believe that the proposed process, as drafted in the document at hand, includes all elements necessary for the arrangements for financial settlement for states in arrears, with the essential deadlines for individual steps, and thus can be agreed at CSP7. In this context, we would like to once again reiterate our regret regarding the dire financial situation of the treaty. The many outstanding contributions put the ATT institutions and activities at risk. In this context, we urge all states to pay their contributions in full and on time and to settle their arrears without further delay. We reaffirm our support for your efforts, Mr. President, to enforce in full the implementation of the ATT financial rules. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, the delegation of the European Union. I have two more speakers on my list, Panama and Switzerland. Panama, you have the floor, please.
Gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos a los
Thank you very much, Chair. We'd like to thank the members of the Management Committee, namely Germany and Costa Rica, for their project relating to Rule 8.1d. This initiative is a good beginning, and even if we support its main elements, we preferred the version that the Management Committee submitted to CSP6. For this reason, we'd like to show our reservations regarding paragraph 10 and the new paragraph, which is paragraph 13 of the revised document. If we want to apply Rule 8.1d, we need to satisfy two criteria, both of them. Firstly, that the state in arrear has to be in arrear for at least 2 years, and two, that they have not reached an arrangement with the Secretariat regarding payment of their contributions. Paragraph 10 seems to indicate that Rule 8.1d will come into effect as soon as the state has fallen in arrears for at least 2 years. It also indicates that these measures will come into effect unless the Conference of the Parties suspends that rule, something which is not foreseen in Rule 8.1d. Once the state party contacts the Secretariat to draft an arrangement with them, should be understood as a suspension of Rule 8.1d. something which is reinforced if we interpret Rule 81D with paragraph 6, which indicates that a country which has been in arrears for at least 2 years can send a proposal of arrangement to the Secretariat, and in doing so, would be interested in paying their contributions. My delegation suggests that we recover paragraphs 10 and 11 of the version of the proposal which was submitted by the Management Committee to CSP6, which we believe are more in conformity with the meaning of Rule 81D. We are not very clear on the sense of paragraph 13 when they speak about financial arrangements in the intersessional period. This is a new element that the Management Committee has decided to include in the new version. We agree with Mexico and Sierra Leone in the sense that the sponsorship program and the VTF are two matters which need to be examined and reassessed in a different process. Thank you very much.
I thank the delegation, Panama. I now see the floor to Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Nous tenons à vous remercier.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to thank you and the other members of the Management Committee for the new project relating to the implementation of Rule 81D and all of the efforts that have been made to arrive at a text that is satisfactory to all states parties. As indicated to the Management Committee at CSP6, we indicated that the mechanism that was proposed at the time seemed to be solid in spite of the fact that certain adjustments needed to be made. We would like to greet the changes that have been made to this text since last year that have strengthened its consistency. This relates to the rephrasing of paragraph 4 as well as the reformulation of paragraph 10. This is a positive evolution in our opinion, although we would have preferred a simpler procedure for paragraphs 12 and 13 of the text, namely that financial arrangement would become null and void if the state is in disregard of its obligations. So this is the only remark that we would like to make with respect to the text, and we would like to invite the Management Committee to take this into consideration in as much as possible, and we would like to thank the Management Committee for the work that it has undertaken. Mr. President, before concluding my remarks, I would like to stress our grave concern relating to the financial situation of the treaty, which is a dire financial situation following the presentation given by the Secretariat a few moments ago. In spite of all the efforts that have been made, the situation is continuing to deteriorate. And this is particularly concerning because we see that the rate of recovery of assessed contributions is something that is dropping year after year. This is a situation that is untenable over time. And as the head of the Secretariat said, we are really going straight into a financial crisis. So remedial measures need to be undertaken. Either we adopt them quickly in the context of the Conference of States Parties, or they will be imposed upon us, which of course would be regrettable and damageable. And for this reason, we call on the responsibility of each and every state party to fully assume its financial obligations under the treaty. I will leave my comments at that, and I thank you very much for your attention, Mr. President.
And I thank you, Excellency, the delegation of Switzerland, for your comments. I also thank you for the great support that you've been providing the ATT, the Secretariat, and a lot of the work of the treaty, in implementing the treaty. So we are extremely grateful for that, and we find your awards extremely important. Switzerland was going to be the last on my list of speakers, but we just suddenly got Ghana wanting to take the floor. So I see the floor to Ghana.
The person you called is unavailable.
Mr. President, and I hope you can hear me.
Loud and clear, Ghana, delegation of Ghana, my brother, yes.
Okay, so thank you once again, Mr. President, and let me also congratulate the Secretariat for putting up this wonderful virtual meeting. So far, so good. We have enjoyed the proceedings so far, and kudos to the team. Let me also thank the co-chairs, Germany and Costa Rica, for the first draft document they presented to us. It's actually a first step. It's better than we having nothing, so it's a first step for us to move forward on this matter. We've also noted the various divergent views that has been expressed by delegations. Obviously, Ghana has some concerns to the draft document. We will table our concerns through you, Mr. President, to the Secretariat, and then also wish to assure the co-chairs that we are ready to work with them in this regard to come to a compromise on this matter. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ghana, for your contribution, and we look forward to receiving your concerns in writing. We have, I'm sure now, the final speaker, South Africa. South Africa, this floor is ceded to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa would like to acknowledge the efforts by Costa Rica and Germany. The proposal provides a measure of certainty to the Secretariat regarding its finances, but also to state parties that will be making arrangements to fulfill its obligations by addressing an area that's currently in the rules not very clear. The arrangement could potentially assist with the universalization of the treaty, as it would allow for states to benefit from the sponsorship program and the VTF, to participate in the ATT's activities and to provide positive feedback to the potential benefits of membership of our treaty to their respective countries. Hopefully, this will assist affecting state parties in prioritizing funding so that the financial obligations could be met. South Africa would also like to make use of this opportunity to call on all state parties to meet its financial obligations under the treaty. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you very much, South Africa, for your submission. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the list of speakers is now exhausted. So I would like to thank the members of the Management Committee, Costa Rica and Germany, for introducing the revised draft guidelines to make the financial arrangements within the framework of the ATT. It has obviously been a very spirited discussion, and we've had a diverse set of views, which we'll be taking on board as we move on. Now we've concluded item 3 of our agenda regarding reports from the ATT subsidiary bodies and the ATT Secretariat. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we will now move on to agenda item number 4, which is the consideration of the CSP7 draft agenda. As it has become customary, draft agenda items for a forthcoming CSP are introduced at the informal preparatory meeting of that CSP. Accordingly, you will find in your package of documents for today the draft agenda items for CSP7. These draft agenda items were prepared in accordance with the requirements of Article 17 of the treaty and Rule 15 of the ATT Rules of Procedure. The draft agenda items reflect items agreed upon by conference in previous sessions and are consistent with agenda items of previous CSPs. So let me now open the floor for delegations to express their views on the draft agenda items for CSP7 as circulated. I have a list of speakers who've already pre-signed up to take the floor. I have four speakers. Number one, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I have China, I have Japan, and I have Control Arms. So I see the floor to Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. You can kindly take the floor, please.
Thank you, President. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom welcomes the ongoing commitment of the President-designate of CSP7, states parties, working groups, and other stakeholders to advance work in the 7th review cycle of the ATT, despite the continued challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. As the ATT community moves forward toward that meeting, WILF offers the following points. We encourage the Presidency of Sierra Leone to continue working in a consultative and transparent manner in matters relating to CSP7 and its preparatory process. WILF appreciates the efforts made by the President and his team and the Secretariat to engage with states and other stakeholders in the ATT community in outlining the plan for the format of CSP7, as well as the format and timing of intersessional work, including this week's round of meetings, and make documentation available. Diverse states and civil society organizations, including WILF, expressed concern that certain aspects of the CSP6 meeting cycle were not held transparently, which generated confusion about both process and substance. With no end to the pandemic in sight, it is foreseeable that unusual working methods will be the norm for some time to come. Thus, transparent and consultative ways of working are more important than ever. In light of the pandemic and a dire lack of resources in critical areas, we reiterate a point we made during the CSP6 meeting cycle. This is an opportune moment to evaluate if and how the existing and proposed meeting modalities, work plans, discussions, and related resource allocations contribute to the real-world impact that the ATT was meant to have. It's important for any treaty community to regularly assess if their meeting cycles continue to be effective and relevant as time passes, or if new working methods or approaches are warranted. This includes building in opportunities to reassess the outputs of past meeting cycles and their thematic areas of focus, taking stock of the thematic agreements from past CSPs, including to see if they have generated policy changes and improvements on the ground, would also reevaluate the purpose of a different priority theme each year. Having a thematic focus allows for meaningful, concrete, and substantive discussion and great opportunities for learning. However, an unintended side effect is the creation of a culture in which we move quickly onto the new thing and the prior theme's focus becomes yesterday's news. One suggestion would be to allocate time with the agenda of CSP7 and future CSPs to update on progress made against past commitments from all CSPs, similar to how this meeting today heard an update from CSP6 agreements. Building on the above point, WILF is mindful of the commitments relating to gender and gender-based violence agreed to at CSP5. Some of these commitments are not being advanced practically, or if they are being acted on nationally, that is not being shared with a view to building wider understanding. However, we are pleased to see the many calls for the inclusion of gender perspectives in the President's draft working paper made earlier this week. In looking ahead to CSP7, we encourage the President, the chairs of the working groups, the facilitators of the sub-working groups, and the Secretariat to explicitly encourage gender diverse participation at the CSP7 in correspondence to states parties and other stakeholders. WILF believes that the encouragement for gender diversity and gender analysis across different articles in the President's and Chair's letters would be an easy way to ensure states parties give continued consideration to commitments made at CSP5 in relation to representation and participation. And we regret that this has not been included in the documentation for this round of meetings. Finally, and as a general comment, WILF continues to caution against proceeding with a business as usual approach, particularly in this extraordinary time. In the midst of a global health crisis, many countries are still engulfed in armed conflict or experiencing high levels of armed violence. This has put pressure on already struggling health infrastructure with wounded civilians and put even more strain on populations suffering from violence and instability. Multiple ATT states parties either continued or resumed their arms transfers to Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners, fueling the crisis in Yemen. There are also ATT signatories providing arms to parties within Libya in violation of a UN arms embargo and their in-principle commitment to the ATT, and in a year in which Libya has recorded the highest number of attacks on health facilities of any country in the world. Other states parties' weapons have been found in Myanmar. World military expenditure has soared, even amid the pandemic. This week, CIPRI's newly released report stated that the total global military expenditure rose to almost $2 trillion in 2020, a 2.4% increase from 2019. Against the backdrop of major arms exporter states continuing to profit off the arms trade during a global health crisis and the limited time and resources of many states parties, it is important to constantly reassess if and how the work being undertaken within the meeting cycle helps to advance the overarching goal of the ATT, to prevent human suffering. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Geyer of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom very sincerely. As a gender champion, I think the omission that she spoke about is unforgivable, and I promise that this will not happen going forward as long as in my presidency. Thank you very much. I now move on to China, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. China's accession to the ATT is a significant step to actively participate in the global arms trade governance and to maintain peace and stability at the national, international, and regional levels. This fully demonstrated China's determination and sincerity in supporting multilateralism and striving for building a community with a shared future for humankind. China will firmly uphold the purpose and object of the treaty, rigorously fulfill its obligations under the treaty, and continue to find appropriate solutions to issues arising from the illicit transfer and misuse of conventional arms. Currently, as the COVID-19 pandemic is still raging all over the world, the CSP preparatory work is faced with certain challenges and uncertainty. China stands ready to work with all sides to overcome these difficulties and push forward discussions during the CSP and in the working groups towards positive outcomes, with the aim of holding a pragmatic, productive, and fruitful conference of state parties to further enhance the universality and effectiveness of the treaty. With regard to the time and schedule of the CSP, we hope that due consideration should be given to the current and future pandemic situation when planning for the conference, so as to ensure full and effective participation while COVID-19 response measures are respected. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, China. Thank you. I now, thank you. I now see the floor to Ambassador Ogasawara of Japan. Ambassador, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Japan would like to express at the outset our sincere appreciation to the President, Ambassador Guberrier, for your leadership and the Secretariat for your dedication with which you have prepared this week's valuable activities. I would like to also thank the efforts made by all the chairs, co-chairs, and facilitators who enabled us to conduct fruitful discussion under all the WGs during this week, despite the unprecedented circumstances due to the pandemic. We found this week's activity truly enhancing and contributing to the fulfillment of the ATT's objectives. At the same time, it is undeniable that we are still facing greater difficulties than in normal years before the pandemic hit us in terms of carrying out the work of ATT body. Therefore, it is appropriate and even necessary in our views that the constraints due to the pandemic should be taken into consideration when the Bureau selects the subjects for decision-making at CSP7, as well as when the content of the draft decisions are drafted. The COVID-19 situation unfortunately required us not to be too ambitious for our decisions on substantive issues, as uncertainty still remains about the degree to which our work would be restrained or hampered by the pandemic constraints. The degree of ambitiousness should be commensurate with the degree of maturity and exhaustiveness of discussion on the subject, which we are going to be able to conduct. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so very much, Excellency. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have two more speakers now on my list. I have Control Arms. Control Arms, please. The floor is yours.
شكرا لإعطاء الكلمة. نيابة عن تحالف Control Arms أود أن أكرر امتناننا.
Thank you for giving me the floor. On behalf of Coalition, I would like to thank the President and the Secretariat for their invaluable efforts in organizing the meetings this week. We thank you for guaranteeing comprehensiveness and transparency for all stakeholders in the ATT in a manner that is commensurate with the objectives and purposes of the treaty. We should like to express to the Secretariat that we thank them for the virtual, clear, and efficient manner in meeting. In these very difficult times where hundreds of thousands are under the impact of COVID-19, and the majority of which have faced serious difficulties as a result of conflict and arms conflict, we hope that we will work together in order to effectively reinvigorate ATT. Many countries this week have said that they have been through COVID, seeing a huge spike in armament. This shows that we have to control irresponsible and illicit transfer of weapons. The conference since 2015 has made headway in improving its work and increasing the transparency. Transparency and reporting continue to be of paramount importance for CSP7, while taking into consideration the need to review the reporting pamphlet. I believe that we cannot assess the effectiveness of the ATT without taking into consideration the compliance within the working group on the effective treaty implementation. We cannot guarantee the effectiveness of the implementations unless we assess the implementation of the provisions of the ATT and the true processing and assessment of violations committed against the provisions. Mr. President, as we look at the agenda, we would like to propose a special sitting next conference where state parties and other stakeholders would be able to assess the progress achieved regarding the commitments taken by previous conferences on matters related to the policy of CSP. For example, Control Arms sees that it is extremely important to continue building the plan of work on GBV and social violence regarding as per the decision taken by CSP5 headed by the president from Latvia, and as for the third conference of the parties under the presidency of Finland. The conference had committed itself to find ways of cooperating between Agenda 2030 and combating transfer of small and light arms. We believe we have to take into consideration all objectives of the Agenda 2030 and the provisions and objectives of the convention, and we hope that we will continue working. The substantive and thematic concentration or focus will allow us to take into consideration the current concerns. The decisions and the plan of actions that are presented by CSP policies are a result of the immense efforts made by all stakeholders of the ATT family. That's why we should applaud all the new thinking and all the ideas set forth. They should not just be considered as paper, as ink on paper. We have to make sure they become implemented, they are effective. We have to review the assessment yearly in order to always update the situations regionally, nationally, and internationally in order to make sure we realize our objectives and purposes. We believe that if we hold a special sitting that we had proposed, this would allow to focus on the special subject and also to reinvigorate the effort and made so far in achieving the important subjects. We propose the first step for the implementation of commitments taken upon ourselves in the previous CSPs, especially regarding increasing the number of women. We see since then a man is heading CSP. We suggest that the future candidates that will be submitted will take into consideration appointing a woman president. On behalf of Control Arms, I should like to thank you all for your time and your effort and your consideration, and we look forward to cooperating with you in the next meeting. Thank you.
I would like to thank Control Arms most profoundly for the contribution. The suggestion about the sort of reflection section of all stakeholders on what progress have and have not been made is taken. Thank you very much, and we'll consider all the other suggestions as we go on. The last speaker on the list is Argentina. Argentina, the floor is ceded to you, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Nada, permítanme agradecer a los intérpretes por su paciencia, por quedarse un tiempo extra, un día viernes, luego de que haya concluido el horario de nuestra reunión hoy. Y bueno, la delegación argentina se suma al pedido de Wilps de añadir un ítem en la agenda de la CSP7.
You may not be speaking in the microphone. The translation is not getting through.
Can you hear me now? I mean, the interpreter.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, it is off.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. You can go ahead, please.
Yes, the interpreters can hear me now. Okay, perfect. La delegación argentina.
The Argentinian delegation subscribes with the idea of adding a point to the future agenda of the conference to debate the working points submitted by previous presidents of previous CSPs. This point in the agenda would be very useful to reanalyze, review, and inform on the status of implementation of such documents by states. So we support to add this item proposed by WILPF. We think this measure of adding an item to the agenda of the CSP7 would help us to advance the proposals of previous presidents and improve the implementation of the treaty. So we would like to ask the president to add a space in the CSP7 agenda to continue the debate on the working paper submitted by the president's. Excuse us, but there was a moment where we couldn't hear what she said, but we would like the working paper submitted by the president of a working group to be studied by the future CSP7 conference. Thank you.
I thank Argentina profoundly for their contribution, which brings to the end the names of speakers on my list. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now move on to the most agreeable parts of this meeting, which is the conclusion. It's been a long week, but now we've reached the end of the CSP7 informal preparatory meetings. We have listened to the views and comments of delegations, and I would like to thank everyone for their contributions. Every contribution is important. In the days ahead, the vice presidents, the chairs and facilitators of all ATT subsidiary bodies, the ATT secretariat, and the president will carefully consider the inputs received from this meeting and, to the extent possible, take them on board. As indicated at the beginning of this section, we have created a possibility for a remote consultation to be held intersectionally in May, June of this year to finalize documentation arising out of the April meetings that will be submitted to CSP7 for consideration. We look forward to your participation in the planned remote consultations and ultimately your participation at the forthcoming 7th Conference of States Parties. That will be extremely important. Details of the CSP7, including its format, will be communicated to you in due course, taking into account the evolution of the current pandemic and its implications on meetings. But now I would like to thank you all for attending this informal preparatory meeting, and I wish you a very restful weekend. The meeting is adjourned. For those who will be going home or will be staying on in Geneva, or who didn't come or who didn't move. I know of a minister who flew from someplace in Africa to attend an online meeting in Geneva, but we are all here. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And I will see you in May, June. Thank you.